Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Well, I'm very pleased that we have such a robust audience to speak to on a Saturday morning. You know, I'm probably happier than Sam Bradford behind an effective offensive line with protection. To have you all here, America needs every single one of you. And the reason that we're going around the country visiting within our federalist system of states, cities, and counties is to share your information. So first and foremost, our goal today is to provide you with some new tools or expand upon tools if you've been familiar with those with our book and our release of our data called How Money Walks. We've had some great speakers already this morning that follow these philosophies, but first and foremost, we're trying to give you your information about how you and voters around you, your constituents in your communities, have voted with their feet and voted with their wallet. And it turns out that we have something useful from the Internal Revenue Service. I know there was a lot of discussion about concerns about overreaching power of the IRS. In this case, we're going to give you something back that you might not have expected from the Internal Revenue Service, which is the results from their taxpayer data file. This is a summary of all your adjusted gross income, or what some of you have packets of information, this sheet that we'll get into in a minute, that looks at what we call the AGI, or the adjusted gross income, of every working American. How many Americans do we have today? About 317 million, 330, depending on what you're projecting. How many people are employed today?
50 million, right? 50 million?
Total U.S. employment out of 317 million, about 114 million. So only 1 in 3 Americans who call themselves Americans or who are living in the latitude, longitude we call America are a part of this system. But the good news of the data I'm going to show you is it includes all that adjusted gross income. If you've been working part-time in college, working your way through school, or if you've been on and off, you've been changing jobs in the last 18 years, we have that data since it's been digitized since Al Gore invented the internet. Remember when Al Gore invented the internet? Yeah. Okay, the year was 1992. So close your eyes and imagine where you were in 1992 for a moment. In 1992, at the end of the year, there were fewer than 50 websites, and a lot has changed since. And what we're seeing, what we're scoring with our book and How Money Walks, chapter by chapter, region by region, is the movement of that income. What story you have told directly or indirectly by your moves since 1992. Now, how many of you were living somewhere else since 1992 to now? Most of you, right? So this is not, I want to be clear about what we're looking at. This is not a survey, it's not a poll, it's not a regression, it's not a focus group. We're looking at the aggregate, or this combined results of anybody who was working since 1992 all the way to 2010. And before someone asked me, we're limited by the IRS catching up. Apparently they've had some other things that have kept them really busy lately. And Congress normally receives an update year over year, usually in November. And I guess because of the delays of all the other things they have to do, we have yet to see that for the 2011. And we're eager so we've done projections from 2011 to 2014 for anyone that may have a particular interest in that. Make sense to you so far? So what is AGI at the state level? So for those of you that raised your hand saying I was somewhere else since between 1992 and now, we're talking about whatever income you filed on your state 1040 tax return, generally to your taxable income definition, based on whatever laws existed at the time with your state and residency. So if you were outside of the state of Oklahoma and you lived in Texas and you moved to Oklahoma, in Texas you had working income to the IRS but not a personal income tax, and then when you moved here that shows up as a credit to Tulsa County, Oklahoma, and it's no longer, whatever your adjusted gross income was there, is no longer reported there. So we see that like a fantasy football trade, right? So we're trading and tracking the cumulative gain or cumulative loss of that adjusted gross income. That's what it's all about. Make sense so far? You still with me? All right, great. So what do we have on the screen? So we can look at that two different ways. We can look at it from a population count, or we can look at it from different ways of income. To get you warmed up to the big picture, to get you the gist visually, I like to start with California. California is doing good things for Oklahoma taxpayers. They're bringing you California entrepreneurs. They're bringing you California income. Why? Why? Well, a lot of reasons, right? Tax factors aren't the only reason, but scored up, what we have on the ESPN Sports Center here, we know that as of 2010, and if we go back, we can track those arrows that start out, but generally the entire country goes green, which is relative from California's position. Those states in green are receiving more income from California than they've lost to California. And the only states in red, relative when we select California, are the states that are contributing, net of all transfers, their income to California. And what do you see just in California? Which states are the only states in America that will contribute and transfer their jobs and their income? Other high tax states. Starting with our friend in Illinois, and Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, on and on and on. If you can't read this here, we've got $45 billion lost in income over the last 18 years, the cumulative loss, and about 36 of the 45 comes straight out of Los Angeles. So we know it's a Southern California problem, more so than Northern. And we can do this for every city, every county, and every state. By drilling in and taking a look. Makes sense so far? Still with me? Great. The biggest loser in America, since you probably want to know, is New York. $68.1 billion lost in the last 18 years. Start spreading the news. They really are leaving. And they've been leaving before Comrade Bill de Blasio was elected mayor. They've been leaving before Governor Cuomo said, income tax free New York. We'll be just like Texas, except, there are a lot of rules. And you got to be in an abatement zone. And we'll pick the winners and losers because we're that smart. This is really a bad story for America that they've raised the price on work at the state, and even worse if you stacked the local earnings taxes for the employees at J.P. Morgan, who still have 27,000 employees on the Rock of Manhattan, who, when visiting a week after the mayor of New York was elected, said, please, 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 one thing only, don't raise our taxes anymore. And to which the mayor replied, that's kind of what I campaigned on. So the polarity that we're seeing in the past performance of the last 18 years tends to be very chronic, tends to be very consistent, and tends to score and correlate very nicely with a number of other measures that we'll showcase in a moment. What's the point? The point is to know a high price on work, to know a state that punishes your work, is to know a state that is losing that work, and losing big in the federal system that you'd expect. So, $68.1 billion is a big number. So let's break it down into things that matter to constituents, things that you can use that are a little bit more tangible. $68.1 billion leaving New York in a New York minute is $7,200. Every minute of every day, of every day, of every year on average for the last 18 years, a New York minute costs New York $7,200 in lost adjusted gross income. Whereas the inverse is true. State like the number one gaining state in America is the Sunshine State. $95 billion going to Florida, and every state in red is contributing their income, net of all transfers, 134 million taxpayer records on average every year, year over year, including some slight contributions from Oklahoma, but mainly folks in the Northeast and the upper Midwest, all going down south. A Florida minute now produces $10,000 in adjusted gross income. Still with me? So, when we can look at our neighbors a little bit close to home, we see that Texas is the #2 leading state. Nearly $25 billion is coming into Texas, and that doesn't tell you the real picture that goes with that, with the jobs and the real economic growth. That they've led job growth in our country for the 4th straight year, about 250,000 jobs just last year. They are carrying America on their back through a lot of these other problems that you've been discussing. And it's really quite remarkable when you score it out on a lot of other metrics, including labor participation and all the other things that is diversifying the state of Texas. Now, I know we're going to talk about comparing ourselves. We're going to have to take a moment and just, let our ego down a little bit between our football opinions and our opinions about property taxes and why we're in Tulsa and not in Dallas. We're going to deal with that here at the end, okay? So just bear with me on that, because there's good news ahead for what you can do to lower the penalty on work that your state house puts relative to your position in Kansas and Texas. But to start, places like Texas have gained $6 billion from California, $3.3 from Louisiana, another $2 billion from Illinois, $1.6 billion, only $1.6 billion from New York. That's why you see Governor Perry running ads in New York saying, we want a piece of your business, because it makes complete economic sense. This is not political bravado. This is brass knuckle competition in our states. Now, $1.6 billion of New York money going to Texas is not very much. In fact, when you compare it, the same money flying out of the coop to Florida, Florida received $18.9 billion of New York income. So it stands to reason that Governor Perry is acting rationally, expecting more corporate income, more corporations, and all those entrepreneurs and financial services, big firms, expecting to locate there, because he has an aggressive story to tell. But still, $1.6 billion is the rough enterprise value of the New York Yankees. So it's not insignificant. But these are big numbers, so we always try to translate them down. So, makes sense to everybody so far. Okay, I want to make sure you have this tool in the palm of your smartphone, since most of you are very eager to advocate in your communities. So, I want to give you that power and potential. If you have on your Google Play Store right now, if you want to take just a moment, we can help you download this in less than a minute. You can have it. It is free. If you need any technical assistance, I have a slightly handicapped assistant that can help you here. He's handicapped because he's a big football fan, and he thinks he can win a game, but for a second, being from Alabama. Matt Blumenfeld's right here. He'll help you. Roll Tide guy, very sensitive about it, but very good sport. If it takes but a second, he can still deliver on it. If you go to Google Play Store, if you're there, or if you're on an Apple phone system, you can go to your Apple Store. And on Apple, it's known as the Taxpayer Data Explorer. It should be free, and you click that to download that, and you can have access immediately to all this data by county, by city, and by state. On Droid again, or anything similar, on your Droid store, it's just known as How Money Walks. So has anyone used it before? A few of you? So I know we've been here in Oklahoma before, part of the debates last year, talking about the tax cut that you hope to have realized that got caught up in some legal maneuvering between fat bills that pass out of the House and Senate. There's an opportunity to come back to it. So what's the results from Oklahoma? Well, the good news is it's not as bad as it could have been. The good news is the trough has been reversing its decline that you were seeing prior to an era of about 2004 and 2005. And if you look on the smartphone, if you're particularly on Droid, you can see that in a chronological time series in a slightly different way than we show it to you here. And it shows that Oklahoma was losing not only to Texas but to other states, and it was going deepening in the trough all the way to something happening in 2005. And then since 2005, the relative decline to other states was reversing its course. What happened in 2005? Tax cuts, right? Your historic tax cuts, the biggest marginal tax cut jump in the steps since you were in the 7s, took you down to the 5.5% range, 5.75 maybe at the first time, and now you're looking at 5.25, going down at least to 5% or below. Well, we've worked with the likes of Art Laffer and others who have looked at this kind of evidence for 50 years, and it shows us actually in your results precisely what we would expect, that when you lower the price of work, you're going to see more of it. Your friends who are progressive know that when they raise the price of cigarettes, what do they want to see? Less smoking. If you raise the price of cigarettes, you want to see less smoking. Why would raising the price of work not result in less work? Why, conversely, why would lowering the price of work not result in more work? So you have lowered the price of work gradually in different steps since 2005, and the losses that show up cumulatively, still under $1 billion at the top max rate of 5.25, have been reversing and getting out of that trough. It stands to reason that if you get competitive or get more aggressive with lowering that price of work, there is a point at which your total tax burden as a percent of your income could be competitive with Texas, could be actually slightly more favorable living here overall than living in Texas. And I know that's an important metric for you to look at. We'll get to what those numbers look like. So, before we do, I mentioned Californians were coming to Oklahoma. How much? If anyone has it there, you can score it on your phone by selecting Oklahoma as a state. It shows $698 million of income leaving California over the last 18 years coming into Oklahoma. $223 million coming in from Kansas. And if you do a deeper dive in the data, you'll see a lot of that's to Tulsa when it came from Kansas. And a lot of it's not just from rural Kansans, it's coming mainly from Wichita. And there's been a distinct migratory flyway, not unlike a duck, coming from Wichita to Tulsa, and not unlike a duck going on south from Tulsa to Houston and Dallas. So we see a lot of these 2 or 3 step migrations a lot throughout the data. Your previous speaker spoke of the massive change in the incentive structure in Kansas. And I'm from the Show Me State, so I'm here on defense of slavers. We're going to counter with our egregious attack by those Jayhawkers. There is a big thing happening in metropolitan Kansas City that we all need to watch. There's a 7% price on work, 6% in Missouri on the Jackson County, Missouri side, plus 1% if you live in the city because you chose an area with the city earnings tax, where you cross literally over here on the other side of the road in Johnson County, Kansas. You have self-employment tax at 0. You have wage W-2 incomes down several percentage points, and you have a different attitude on spending, different attitude on regulatory environment, stronger school systems, stronger property tax systems in terms of a tax base. It's a very important thing for us all in America's heartland to watch. And it does take time because leases don't just break when new tax laws change. A lot of people have long-term leases and businesses that go 1, 3, 5, 10 years. So there's a lot to watch in this. But the important thing about this number is that, is it more likely that Kansas income will come in the future or less likely based on what just happened? Less likely because the price of work is at least 5% higher now if you're trying to create a business. And if you're working for someone else on their payroll, it's still, if you have a way to do that now in Wichita, it's going to be more competitive. You're going to keep more in every paycheck and every annual salary. So Kansas has lowered the boom and truly put Oklahoma in a tax sandwich between Kansas to the north, particularly on Subchapter S corporations, and all the different continual tax cuts that we've seen in Texas that we know a lot about. So if we can't count on $223 million of income in the future on that pattern changing, other states contributing have been Michigan, Illinois, and even New Mexico. And of course, the big picture here on the loss, $1.27 billion has been bled out to Texas. So most of you intuitively know that sense of competition. Florida, Arkansas, Colorado, and Oklahoma's even lost $121 million to Missouri. So this is a little bit about how that works. Population count-wise, not as bad. So we score taxpayer counts with the U.S. Census against that income, and that gives us an idea. We're talking about half of the Oklahoma State stadium full of people. Now, some people, some of your left friends might say, well, that's not that much considering all the people. But keep in mind, we're tracking job creators, we're tracking the entrepreneurs, the lifeblood, the mother's milk of private sector investment. And as your congressman just pointed out, we have a $16 trillion economy. 70% of it comes from consumer spending. 70% of our U.S. economy, as a part of the $60 trillion global economy, comes and is driven by private consumer spending. So that's why consumption-oriented modes of taxation are a lot less volatile. That's why they're a lot more efficient in the future. That's why the compliance cost goes down, and it gets out of the way. If you eliminate other types of taxation on production, it gets out of the way of production and earnings, which means by function you can expect to see more of it. So sometimes you might get the argument that, well, the majority of people that I know still haven't moved. We're not saying that you're going to. We know there are many reasons why you're loyal to your local community. What we're saying is tax factors don't come up every day, but when they do, they can have dramatic consequences on the long-term economic picture. So, and we can score this a variety of other ways, coming down, looking at different kinds of income and different kinds of transfers. Just to end it up, Kansas, when they refer to the lost decade, they were trending worse than Oklahoma in the past 10 years, in particular, a loss of $3.1 billion. Places like my home state were benefiting from Illinois and Iowa, but then shifting all of their income to Texas and Florida. And this is often the case around the country. We see, why would you just go next door when you've already got it packed up? U-Haul doesn't care. U-Haul will take it anywhere. And if you are at that point in your life where you're making a major life change with you and your family, we know that Illinoisans from Chicago don't go to Dubuque, they don't go to Madison, they go to Phoenix and Fort Myers. And we see it in the data. And so we've represented and visualized this a variety of ways. At the county level, when we zoom in here a little bit, we can look at Tulsa County, Oklahoma. And we built all this ourselves. We get questions about how we did this. We can draw on it now. We're working it so that every producer at Fox and Friends is excited when we arrive with the touch screen because it works great on television. The counties in green are receiving income to Tulsa County in the region. So this is showing a suburban effect. The counties in red, when we have Tulsa County selected, are sending their income, their people. And those are largely rural counties. Make sense to you? So we see other things going on within an area drilling down. And at howmoneywalks.com, if you didn't use the app, you can also use the web map, which shows you this by clicking on a mouse visually, if that's better for you. You can take a screenshot of any of these kinds of things. You'll notice that we still have these arrows, and sometimes these arrows go other places in America. And this is where we see Tulsa receiving California income. And what I told you earlier about Los Angeles being the place. So some of you have been thinking about how do you sharpen your tools, you know, with the debates you're having. Well, at least center right with the arguments, it's important that you have facts and figures in addition to your moral arguments, your emotional arguments, your anecdotes, and your other community evidence, right? So this, for example, shows you a good example of the kind of California income coming to Tulsa. It is not Silicon Valley. It is not high-tech companies from San Francisco. However, it is working family businesses with an average to above average income in San Bernardino, in Orange County, and Los Angeles. So maybe you know people who are responsible for economic development work here in the greater Tulsa area. Maybe you have community partnerships with your county, with your city, or your state. Are those associations and entities using their finite resources to speak to people who we already know are here from this evidence? And we also know the bad news, right? That when we're clicking on an area like Tulsa, we see the migration going to Dallas and Houston as a result. So this is not good news, it's not bad news, it's not ugly news, it's just what's happening. It's what everyone, love them or hate them, are doing with their paychecks and their wallets over the last 18 years. By contrast, you can go around the state and see other evidence of that, like in Canadian County, where you see the trends coming up around the area, but then you see the impact of oil and gas in different ways in different industries. If you live in a town that is a military base, and the military base makes transfers, and those transfers go to California or come back to Pensacola, Florida, we'll see that in the adjusted gross income transfers. So there are certainly evidence of different anomalies like that. But on average, what's the big picture? The big picture is taxpayers are fleeing high-tax states and flocking to low-tax states. States like Minnesota are making big moves, and they are electing people at the top of their state who are ignoring this basic reality and actually going the opposite direction. And you're going to talk a lot about the different red states, blue states, and we can look at it that way. So there is a red state, blue state contrast in America, and the distinctions are sorting out more and more aggressively. It matters more and more where you choose to live in America. Gallup poll recently did a rating. They track daily evidence of in over 500,000 Americans over the last year. They do this every year, and they ask you, are you conservative or are you liberal? And we are a center-right country. More people identify with their own label as conservative than they do as liberal, even if you call yourself liberal in Massachusetts, Vermont, or the District of Columbia, which is interesting, isn't it? So you hear Oklahoma scores out as the 8th most self-labeled conservative state in the country. You are a fiscally red state. There is no doubt about it when it comes to taxes and spending, which means why you cannot expect a lower price on work, why you cannot expect responsible spending decisions and a good litigation environment for business. You have every right to expect it and deserve that. The most conservative state, self-ranked by Gallup a couple weeks ago, was Wyoming, followed by Mississippi, followed by Idaho. The most liberal areas in the state, in the 50 states, was deemed to be the District of Columbia, Massachusetts, and Vermont. So someone's probably out there saying, well, I wonder if there's a correlation between these ideologies. As a matter of fact, there is. When you take our same migration data and you look at the top 10 self-proclaimed most conservative states in the country, in the last 18 years, they show a collective AGI, adjusted gross income gain, of $39 billion. Pretty good results. Different set of scoring than what we were looking at in income tax rates. If you do the opposite, and you take the 10 most liberal ranked states as their residents have labeled them, you see over the same 18-year period a loss of $139 billion. So the swings are consistent with our overall migration what you would expect. Besides the fact that it's smart to live in a place like Oklahoma or Texas versus a place that's going to penalize your work and make it harder for you to open a business in a place like Massachusetts, there's a bigger American drive here. We all want America as a country to be performing back at 3.5% and 4% GDP growth, and not sputtering at 1.8 or 2.2 with all the other problems to the load that you've been hearing about from Washington. So it's great that if you happen to have a favored position in energy and in taxes, and you have your assets spread in these locations, that's great for you, but there's more to it than that as to why other people in your community need to understand that there are facts, there is evidence, and there are histories here. We can look at retiree friendliness, where the white states are the least friendly to retirees according to Kiplinger, and we can look at state and local taxes per capita. Here's something that we can get to where I want to end up today. These are all the taxes that Oklahomans pay per capita, according to all the taxes that are identified. And when you just rank that against the population, on average you're looking at about $3,800 a year, where about $2,500 of it comes from the state, another $1,300 local. And we've got everything from hunting and fishing license here to motor fuels, that the average that you pay, to tobacco sales. You can score it a variety of different ways. But I often hear when I'm visiting Oklahoma, I heard it at Tulsa World, I hear it at Oklahoma City, at the Oklahoman editorial board, moving to Texas is not the answer because property taxes are much higher. So let's deal with that for a moment. Well, first of all, we also look at the percentage of Americans that itemize their mortgage deductions, and that's not what you would expect. But when we get to property taxes, we can score that out too by every county in America. And so when we do see, there's a subtle difference, but you can see, can everybody pick out where Texas is? It is a little bit darker than Oklahoma counties. The highest, so what this is scoring is a relative grade on median property taxes paid as a share of your median household income. And dark red is about 4% of median household. So Mark with his wife and anyone else earning income in that household grouped together with the property taxes they pay in Rogers County, right? Mm-hmm. Compared to if he was moving in telecommunications down to Dallas or Houston, on average, what these dark red areas would be 2%, or I think the worst case scenario to be a Texan paying property taxes would be in Houston. Let me see if I'm right by memory. So yeah, so 2.3% of your median household income would be in right downtown Houston if you were moving in oil and gas industry, let's say from Tulsa, going down there. So highest in the state is Tulsa right here at 1.06%, and you're paying about more than double that there. Now, most of you probably know that intuitively. You've probably used that before. Anyone not referred to higher property taxes in Texas as a means to justify why you're wanting to stay here? And you'll hear that from constituents if you were, walking for Americans for Prosperity, going out helping OCPA Impact do something, or visiting with the Heritage Action folks in any capacity. You're probably going to get that question. You're going to get that argument. So let's attack it. Let's engage it. Well, that as a average tax in Harris County, Texas is about $3,000 versus in Tulsa County, you're looking at about $1,300. So because that comes to your home, or because you made the big step the first year that you're there in Houston, you notice, wow, this seems a lot higher than it was before. And you call all your friends and family back home and say, well, things are pretty good down here, but I'll tell you one thing that stinks is paying this property tax bill, right? We're all sensitive to taxes based on the frequency that we're touched by them, and whether or not how emotionally coupled they are to our household or disposable income, right? There's a reason why the federal government wanted withholdings out of your W-2, so that you're emotionally decoupled from understanding that within 2 months You're not getting a gift back. You didn't do some neat forced savings program where they made you some money and now you're going to go buy a washer and dryer or a car payment. You're getting free money, even though there will be ad after ad reminding you what you can do with your refund, right? In fact, you've overpaid to your federal government without interest, and you shouldn't have. So, but there's a lot of confusion in our federal tax system that was by design, 2 pages a day in regulation added over the last 100 years, where Congressman Camp likes to say the federal tax code is 10 times the size of the Bible and full of none of its good news. He's right. In fact, there was just a recent Circuit Court ruling that on defense of taxpayers, because the claim by the IRS was that you don't need a tax preparer necessarily, and that they have certain powers over tax preparers. And the ruling at the lower court was it's impossible to expect an ordinary taxpayer not to have someone helping them for fear that they're going to make, or in fact do make, mistakes because of the burdensome nature of our tax system. Now, going back to this, what's the point? The point is that these bills because they come to your door, and if you own the asset, the older you are, the more likely you are to own that asset. Therefore, the less likely you are to have it in a mortgage payment buried into all the finances and fee structures so that you can ignore it just like you did for your W-2 income. So that's why seniors are more sensitive to property tax assessments and more vocal about it at the local, city, and state level. That should not be confused with your reactions to your community and neighbors on the penalty that we put on work. It just means that we have a bigger job to do to explain the sensitivities that are more important. If this is $1,500 difference on median household incomes that were at $126,000 in Tulsa versus median incomes that were $131,000 on average in Houston, for the lifetime earning potential of someone working in Houston, the benefit is way more than $1,500 a year. But you don't know that because you don't see it on a bill, and no one comes to you like you are in the NFL, where you have all kinds of handlers telling you exactly what you're supposed to do so that you can go play football. Instead, we have to kind of game this out. But there are some other sites that can help you do this, sites that we've collaborated with in addition to How Money Walks. One of them is called Save Taxes by Moving, SaveTaxesByMoving.com. Okay, so what you can do, say you're that person there considering a move to Houston. You can plug in your age, plug in your income, your gross income, or your household income, whatever you prefer, and then add any dependents. It's a simplified model compared to how the tax code works, but it gives you the basic results. And it'll show you for your age, the presumption of how many more years you intend to work at that level or above, what you're eligible to save over your lifetime earning potential. And it's an easy way for people to understand that the savings moving, even when you talk about paying $1,500 more property taxes, you're about 1% on your tax burden as a percent of your total income better being a Texan than you are in Oklahoma. Let me be clear. Even after you adjust for higher property taxes, in most cases, you are still financially better off being a resident of Texas versus Oklahoma. That is not the common mantra you hear in the greater Tulsa area, and it needs to be exposed for what it is and what it is not. So the question is, we began thinking, with the likes of OCPA here locally that are fighting in the trenches for you every week in the Capitol, what would it take? Because we know property taxes are in fact lower here in Oklahoma, and depending on how you score it and what you eliminate on progressivity of your income tax, if you just take the top tax rate here and you would adjust it down to the point where you were on par with the gentleman from Texas, to be dollar for dollar matched truly, pound for pound on total tax burden, you probably need anywhere from 37% reduction of your income tax rate to a 42% reduction. That means it wouldn't be from 5.25 to 5% in order to be scored equally. It has to be down near 3% before the other relative advantage of lower property tax assessment would equal everything else out. Does that make sense? Okay? So this is the kind of power that we can use from this data. And of course, we're looking at the other big debates happening around the country in the 50 states, such as the Kansas-Missouri border heartland tax rebellion. But most importantly, we want you to be comfortable understanding how to use these tools, understanding how we can talk about them, and seeing other projections. There's many people that have many different layers of data. This is Small Business and Entrepreneurship's Council survey of what they consider the best places to be. We've done different growth rates and looks at different years. I want to show you this. I mentioned the IRS has not caught up in 2011. So we've taken the past performance and done projections with some volatility of unknowns, especially in states like Oklahoma that have oil revenues that vacillate back and forth a little bit more. And they generally show our tallies. Survey projected from 2010 to 2014. By the end of this year, we're projecting a slight gain for Oklahoma in the last 3.5 years. That's good news because it continues the trend of what we were mentioning earlier, that you've been working your way out, and it stands to reason that if you do fulfill the promise that the State House has made to try to get taxes at a lower rate again marginally this year, it will make a positive contribution. You can see the states that in our projections for November of this year continue to be Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Arizona, South Carolina, New Jersey. On the bottom 5, New Jersey, Michigan, Illinois, California, and our friend in New York, again, losing and losing big. Now this is not just looking at one layer of data. It's like a functional MRI. We're seeing things a certain way. We're not tracking behavioral, dynamic scoring of the other attitudes. We're not measuring the charitable giving benefit of an entrepreneur being in a community with his household. We're not scoring out all the direct and indirect benefits to the economy and the way things grow with real GDP growth. We're doing that later with another release with Art Lafford, Steve Moore, Rex Singfield, and myself. But we are showing you layer after layer, correlation after correlation, how much evidence do you need besides your own in your community to understand that when you penalize work, you can expect less of it. When you reward work, you can expect more work. So maybe that's a good place to wind up, and we can talk about anything else that you might want in this pattern, or other things we didn't get a chance to. I know there'll be a few questions. So yes, sir.
Just a quick plug. I downloaded the app while you're
okay.
Said.
Yes.
It's fantastic. I mean, if you're talking
Great.
federal, state, local arguments,
yes.
It's right there at your fingertips.
Thank you. A gentleman from Heritage talks about how easy it is. That's wonderful. An interesting factoid about the congressional aspect of this data. If you go back the last century, we score relative rankings of states, in part based on the voice we send to Washington, state by state. The 9 states without a personal income tax, states like Tennessee, Florida, and Texas, have only lost 2 congressional seats in the last 100 years. Once it happened in Tennessee after World War I or World War II, and before that once was South Dakota. They are normally standing to gain 2 or in some cases 4 congressional seats, whereas states like my home state of Missouri once had 16 members of Congress 100 years ago. Then now they have 8 because they're not growing. So it's another way we can see this. There's many different layers, and they all point towards your intuitive thinking typically. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Travis, thank you so much for this presentation today. I've heard it several times. I wanted to point out, this is more of an observation than a question. A delegation from Broken Arrow went up to Overland Park.
Yeah.
Was there for a week. Guys, you hear the story that if we reduce taxes, we won't have enough for education. Well, they have one of the top 2 school districts in the state. So I don't follow that reasoning. I don't know if you do or either. But
yeah.
The other thing is their median income is about $76,000 a year. They have added 100,000 new residents in Johnson County alone over the last 10 years. And
I know it's dangerous giving a politician a microphone. I want you guys to hear what David said.
they've added hundreds of businesses up there. And if you look at the cash flow they have in their county accounts, it's tremendous. This is how money walks. This is what Travis is talking about. And for Broken Arrow to go up there, we're 100,000 now, and try to emulate what they've done up there, it's a remarkable, remarkable community. And I can just tell you that lower income taxes have brought business and personal growth and revenue to that city that we need to model here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your comment there, and it is certainly true that that's part of the reason we wanted to give you this a different way for those people on paper, tracking the top 5, the bottom 5, population gain or lost counties, and the income movement as well. People receive this information differently, but one of the drives of getting this data visual into television is to make it clear and easy for people to pick up within 2 milliseconds the gist of what we're trying to say, because it is certainly true there's a big set of changes coming. I know that OCPA in particular has data, all the evidence in the last decade that in fact when you've made marginal cuts to income, your state revenue, your government receipts have actually increased and beat forecasts. It's exactly what we would have predicted with Laffer's data. And you're actually seeing it, but there's a conscious denial and distraction that no one wants to hear because there's a tendency to think that you're taking something away and we're not sure how it's going to come back.
Well, even in the recession years, when we had those 2 years, sales tax growth stabilized everything. So every time you cut the tax, you get personal growth and you get revenues.
Thank you. Question in the back, lady, right there.
Hang on.
What was that app again? Taxpayer what?
On Apple products, it's the Taxpayer Data Explorer. The ghost of Steve Jobs made us change the name.
On an Android?
On Android, it's How Money Walks. How Money Walks application. Yes. Taxpayer Data Explorer. The Apple coders could not have accepted that he knew how to brand ourselves.
Travis, thank you very much for that presentation. I just had a question, if maybe you could clarify, on the move toward Florida or the growth in Florida over those years. When I think of Florida, I think of retirees.
Yes.
How much of that, did you do a demographic? What age group was it that was moving?
Thank you for that question. I get this question a lot because there's a tendency to believe we attribute these moves to other things like sunshine, global warming, and retirement effect. Keep in mind, that's why I wanted you to understand what we're seeing here is state 1040 tax returns. So if that is your household and you're moving to Fort Myers from here, and your intention is to slow down, maybe not quit work altogether, but have less work so that you can enjoy yourself, then you're trying to earn less income or unearned income and just carry your retirement income. Where you see retirement income, if it's part of your taxable income, to the feds, but it's really hard to get $95.6 billion from retirees who are not trying to work. And certainly there are large incomes. There are places like Naples, Florida, where we have an office that comes in right here, down in here, that draw a tremendous amount from other regions. Here's what I mean by the migratory flyway. Collier County is where Naples, Florida is. It's the largest adjusted gross income per capita trade in the east of the Mississippi. West of the Mississippi by county, it's Jackson Hole, Wyoming. There's a reason why financial service firms out of New York are relocating their personal residence, their tax residence in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, if they're a mountain person. And there's a reason why all those firms in the Midwest are going to Naples County. So The age bracket, we see all income regardless of demographic. We do not split by age, but we know generally that the higher incomes tend to be a little bit older, that people if you look at U.S. Census transfers, when they're making big moves over 300 miles or more, they tend to be younger in the system. And this is where we get to economic mobility, that talking to your graduates of college or your kids and grandkids really matters. The lifetime earning potential of a nursing graduate from the University of Florida choosing to stay in Florida with a best friend somewhere else with the same degree in California who wants to stay in California, that nursing graduate in California is going to generally earn $600,000 to $800,000 less in her lifetime or his lifetime versus the same person making the same equivalent function in a place like Florida. Florida has retirement effect in it, but that's not what explains the tremendous gain of $95.6 billion. You simply can't get there from here only on retirement. You see what I'm pointing out? Thank you.
Hang on just a second real quick. We're going to take one more question from David, and then what we're going to do is we're going to break for about 10 minutes so that we can finish getting the lunch set up for you. Travis will be down here, and so you can talk to him down here, look at his smart board, and then there's also 10 books that he has of How Money Walks for sale in the foyer. So the first 10 people can get it, and he will sign them. Right?
Absolutely.
All right. And if we run out, we'll order some for you. So.
And then Baxter will sign them.
And then Baxter will sign them. That's right. So one more question, and then we'll break. And if you have any other questions, Travis will be available down here for you to visit with for a few minutes as we finish setting up lunch.
I think we had a question right here.
Yeah.
Mark?
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Mark and then David, maybe.
Yeah, I just want to say, I wanted to speak to this. If you look at Oklahoma, all the property taxes was pretty similar. Back in the 80s, we had this ad valorem reform. The net result was where school districts used to be funded more in property taxes, and it was a battle fighting for industry based on school districts.
Right.
Now I'm seeing this in a bigger level where states are fighting each other to bring in industry. What happened in Oklahoma, when you got rid of that competition, all of a sudden you got rid of that local control over education. Now the state controls it.
Right.
Transfer it to a national level. What's to stop the result of this state competition to everybody lowering their taxes? To people like New York saying, federal government, come on in here and stop this. And then states lose more control. Federal takes over more. I wanted you to speak to that.
Sure. So David's question is, if the polarity increases and we have a red state, blue state contrast, will the blue states cry foul and you try to use their population weight perhaps against those red states that are trying to localize their sense of government, flatten their sense of accountability at the local level? And that's absolutely already happening. No one talked much about December 31st. Now, we know why Washington's in gridlock, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for some of the things that are trying to advance in Washington. But one of the negatives are a lot of things that should have extended did not extend. So any resident of Texas previous to December 31st of last year could take the state sales taxes that they otherwise paid as an offset against their federal income tax, because they live in one of the 9 states where they don't put a price on income tax work. They lost that. It was not renewed because it was not caught up. So this is already happening to an extent. You are subsidizing blue state, bigger spending states through Medicaid, through the Affordable Care Act, and a variety of other mechanisms where the tax code is used as a weapon to coerce people, similar to drunk driving laws, and in order to get federal highway funds and many other things like that. It is up to you, ultimately, as Federalists, to support many of the ideas that you're here for today, to defend the correct sense of balance between state, local, and federal authority. And never before, perhaps since the Revolutionary War, has it been under siege in terms of how aggressive those assumptions are. Not just in terms of the laws that conflict with each other and the balance of power between states, but also the sense of federalism as applied to the rule within law or the absence of rule within law. So it's more important now than ever if you want to carry liberty to the next generation, that you're a part of this and speaking your mind. Because it may be that the NSA is the only federal government that truly listens. Thank you very much.